Hello, welcome. I hope you can all hear me and that you can all see my slide up on the screen. Yeah, I can see that some people are nodding. Good, good. Thank you for joining. So this is the latest in a series of webinars that we're conducting here at Joskos. And every webinar, we try to focus on something relevant to our clients and to the education community. And today's is probably one of the most important ones I think we've done so far, looking at cybersecurity and how we can help you, how you can help yourselves, and how companies such as our partners at Nine can help secure you and prevent the worst of things from happening to you, really. It can be quite involved, and we'll try and keep it understandable and practical throughout. But without further ado, let's carry on. So, although you can't see me at the moment, I am Oliver Marshall. I'm the head of sales here at Joskos. So I look after the sales and account management team. We're the guys that you would see on a regular basis coming to your schools, for those of you that are clients. And for those of you that are yet to experience our fantastic service, then we're the team that would come and meet you and sort of spec out requirements and discuss what's going on. We are joined today by Mark Orchison, the founder and CEO of Nine. Mark is an incredible guy, a great presenter, as you'll find in doubt, but also incredibly knowledgeable and experienced in cybersecurity, as are all of Nine. And I think we will touch upon later sort of why Nine and why Joskos work with Nine and why that's so successful. So we're going to look at over the next hour, and it might be a bit of a squeeze because there is a lot of content that we could talk about here. And indeed, it would be really interesting to sort of expand on this over a series, because some of these things, I'm sure Mark will explain, we could talk about for hours. But we're going to look at just a brief introduction. Why Joskos? Why Nine? Mark will then dig into the current threats facing your schools and colleges and academies, the changing shape of that cybersecurity landscape. This is something that perhaps 3 years ago schools possibly didn't have on their radar at all. It was something that happened to perhaps the unlucky few, and you read about in newspapers and news feeds. But in reality now, this is something that every organisation, not just schools, but every organisation needs to be very aware of, and they need to understand their responsibilities, the bits they can control, the bits that they can't. We'll also look at information security obligations within UK GDPR. Now, obviously, GDPR is very useful for the end user. It allows access to data and the visibility of privacy. It can be a challenge to meet all those requirements, and then to overlap that as well with security just takes an extra little bit of foresight. And then Mark will also be looking at statistics and examples of how all of this has played out at other schools, just so you can see the real world sort of implications of this. And obviously at the end, just talk about those practical steps that you can take and your sort of next steps on that journey, and then any questions and answers. I suppose I should start so that I can pass over to Mark. Why Joskos? So who are we? I think looking at the participants list, lots of you are already Joskos clients in some way, shape or form, but some of you aren't. So for those that aren't, a brief overview. We've been in education since 1999, before the millennium. We are purely educationally focused. So everyone here works in education, solely in education. It's allowed us to build up a huge wealth of experience and understanding of the industry, if you like, that you all operate in, the pressures, the strains, the concerns, the strengths indeed, and the weaknesses. Many of us are educationally focused outside of work. So I myself am a governor. Our executive board are full of educationally aware leaders. We have the founder of The Key, which many of you may know is an excellent source of data for us governors. I'm on it most evenings, I think. We work with MATs and schools across the country, greatly in the south and the Midlands, but slowly over time that's also creeping up to the north. We also focus on a very established managed service model. So there is part of our business that is focused on, I won't say bleeding edge, but the cloud, the cutting edge technologies coming out and how they can benefit schools so that you can deliver, particularly now, that very sort of new and modern blended learning experience so that you can protect yourself against all kinds of precautions. But alongside that, we also provide standard managed service models, so the provision of people on site, the strategic advice moving forward. We are obviously perhaps financially stable. We always sort of reinvest. We're very big believers in the values of the company and the values of the staff. And we've recently opened a dedicated team over in Birmingham to cover the Midlands and the surrounding areas. So we've sort of tried to move out of that southeast corner that sort of catches so many firms and slowly move up the north. Really, for me, I think that kind of covers the Joskos side. Today isn't about us. Today is very much about Nine and you guys and the risks that you face. Any of you that want any information about us as a company, please do reach out to me. Details will be provided afterwards. We'll also be recording this so that you can share it among any colleagues and peers, and it will be available through all the usual channels. If at any time during the presentation you have any questions or you want to stop Mark and ask him to clarify something, my colleagues Akila and Mark and I will be monitoring the chat. So please do sort of put a comment in the chat window, and we'll be able to give Mark a nudge and just get him to answer any questions. And then at the end we'll have a proper question and answer session where we can also dive in and discuss what we've heard. And now, in reality, Mark, I think that's my piece done. So over to you. Yes, I can see your slide. Oh, you're muted, Mark.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, you can all hear me. Fantastic. So it's great to be joining Joskos this morning on this webinar. So the title is "What Can Your School Do to Reduce Your Vulnerability by 85%?" As Oliver said, where's my slides gone? There we go. We'll go to hello first. My name's Mark Orchison, so I'm the founder and the CEO of Nine. We are based in London, but we have offices in North America and in India. About 50% of our business is actually outside of the UK, and we support cybersecurity in schools from San Francisco all the way to Japan. So some of our schools are probably the largest schools in the world, 8,000 students in Singapore. We've got 2 schools in Singapore that are quite substantial. One's got 5,000 students, the other one's got like 8,000 students. And our role there is supporting schools with their compliance obligations around technology. That includes data protection, cybersecurity, and IT management. Not only are we recognised in partners like Joskos for sort of our areas of expertise, but we are also recognised by the likes of Educare. If you know Educare, we have recently written their new GDPR course for schools and for teachers and for school staff. That's being launched very, very soon. But in addition to that, we are the cybersecurity, data protection and safeguarding partners for an organisation called Icasia. That represents 4,500 schools globally, 2 million students in 120 questions. So I'd like to think that we know what we're doing. As Oliver said, these are sort of topics that we're going to go through. I'm going to talk to you about the threat context. I'm going to talk to you about the obligations, specifically within the Academy Trust Handbook. So for those that are multi-academy trusts or academies, the Academy Financial Handbook was replaced last week with the Academy Trust Handbook. And there are specific obligations in there aligned to cybersecurity that I'm going to talk you through. And then we'll go through about what you can do practically to reduce your risk by 85%. And this statistic, 85%, is based upon our analysis of working with schools. So in the past 7 days, we have done a cyber vulnerability assessment at 7 different schools. And so collectively, when we analyze the results of those 7 schools, we understand what the common themes are and what the common issues are in terms of vulnerabilities. And it's the vulnerabilities that allow a cyber attacker to laterally move across your IT architecture. So if you solve those vulnerabilities, you're actually significantly reducing the risk of, if someone gets control of a device or a system, that there's a less likelihood of them being able to put in place a malware that can encrypt data, which is what you would have seen in the news in the past few weeks and months and whatnot. We'll also provide you with the resources to support you. There's some resources from the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. If you're all UK schools, I don't know whether there's anyone who isn't a UK school, but the NCSE offer a couple of services. One service is that you can register your fixed IP address with them, and they'll monitor your fixed IP address for any potential issues of attack. And they will also, there's some other resources that you can use for Windows monitoring of systems and services for any difference in changes of CPU usage across devices and across platforms, all those different types of metrics that may inform a type of attack taking place. And so we'll provide you with those resources. To be compliant with the law within the UK, there's a law called the GDPR, or the UK GDPR. There are 2 aspects of the GDPR that are important when it comes to cybersecurity. The first is Article 25, which is data protection by design and by default. That basically sets out that any project that you do as a school, so if you're upgrading your systems, your servers, you're replacing laptops, you are going cloud, you are upgrading the wireless, you're putting network switches in, any of those IT projects, the first part of that project is the consideration around security, and you documenting that you have thought about the security implications of the systems that you are upgrading. And a second is Article 32, which is security of processing. And security of processing is all about you having an understanding of the current risks facing your systems architecture, and you can evidence that you understand those risks and that you are mitigating those risks. So as a business, I've already touched upon it. These are the things that we do. We have subscription services that support you in the areas of data protection, cybersecurity, tech and safeguarding, but also we have technology. So we have built a governance, risk and compliance platform that allows you to proactively manage your cyber risks. It proactively allows you to manage your data protection. And if you have a cyber incident or security incident, it allows you to effectively manage and determine whether your security incident is reportable to the ICO within the UK. For any further information, then you can get in contact with Joskos, or my details are on this slide deck. So when we look at the threat context globally, prior to the pandemic, whilst education was a target, it wasn't as much of a target as it is at this moment in time. And we have seen various different authorities sending out certain bulletins around the target of education. This one here is from the FBI and the associated agencies on December 10th. But in the UK, we have the NCSE, and the NCSE, the National Cybersecurity Centre, has issued 3 bulletins, the first in September, the second in December, and the last one that's most recently is in June. And this is basically making schools aware that you're under attack and you should be doing something about your cybersecurity. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity, and when I talk about it to school leaders, there is often like a blank look of despair that you're talking about a topic that I just don't understand. And cybersecurity can be quite easily sort of summarized as effective IT operations. If you have effective IT operations in terms of how your systems are configured and how you're managing those systems, you will have a very, very good cybersecurity posture. If you have poor IT operations and poor systems management, then you're going to have, by its very nature, a very, very poor cybersecurity posture. And all a cybersecurity attacker is doing is scanning your systems for where they're being poorly managed, and identifying the vulnerabilities of those systems, and then compromising those through penetration testing, which is the more difficult piece. So if you get effective IT operations, then you can protect yourselves generally very, very well from any type of cyber security attack. Therefore, the actual topic itself doesn't need to be confusing, because it's very, very simple and straightforward in the context of running IT within a school. Only last week or 2 weeks ago, the GCHQ identified that cybersecurity is the biggest online threat to people within the UK, not only to schools but to you and I in our daily lives, and that the DFE has been so concerned about the number of attacks that are targeting schools that the CIO of the DFE wrote to all schools and all multi-academy trusts in April, instructing schools to identify what the crown jewels are, make sure there's an instant action plan, and essentially have defenses so that if you are the victim of an attack, that you can easily restore your systems and services in the event of an incident. When we look at the landscape, this report here is from the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. So if you just type that into Google, you can probably get the rest of the report. But the largest area of attack is, I'm not going to go through all of these because there's 15 of them, but the biggest one is the malware, and specifically in education, there's a Trojan called Chachi at the moment that is targeting as a form of malware, a Trojan, that is being used to compromise the IT systems and services within schools. So there's a whole variety of different incidents that have been published on BBC News. There is this week there was 5 schools in Anglesey, or on Friday 5 schools in Anglesey that completely got taken down. It is likely that was through the Trojan Chachi, which would have been and what would have happened there is the schools, or one of the schools, would have had an RDP service facing the internet that has been compromised through brute force, and consequently the Trojan is then entered through the RDP service, and then a ransomware malware installed once the access to data and systems has been secured. And the RDP issue is the largest and biggest threat to schools. So if you've got RDP services facing the internet, me as an attacker, I can scan the internet to locate your RDP service. I can identify the port that it's located on your firewall, and the RDP service is easily brute forced attacked. So I can brute force the password, the username, I can gain access. As soon as I gain access, I can gain all the access to the services that the RDP can, and consequently, if you've got poor IT operations hygiene, or there are issues with your security misconfiguration, I can laterally move myself like snakes and ladders until I find systems and services that I want to put a ransomware on, and basically stop you having access to that. When we look at the total threat context facing schools, in January 2020, the threat context was about 20%. So what this shows is the total malware encounters from Microsoft. It's a 30-day average, and prior to the pandemic, is about 20%. Now I know this says 61.92%, but if you go here, you'll be able to see it's closer to 64%. So 64% of total malware encounters are focused on or reported by education, which tells us that almost 2/3 of attacks are targeting education. Or you could look at it a different way: 2/3 of cyber criminals are targeting their time on attacking education, because education has generally lower defenses and are quicker to pay out, and more easily they are to hack than any other organization. So consequently, there's a quicker reward, there's a quicker payouts because of that, and that's where the focus is. And this has been reported. It's been between 62 and 64% since September of last year. And essentially, apologies for my clip art diagram here, but basically, the attack surface is fundamentally changed. On the left-hand side, you've got the kids and the devices within the school, protected by security and IT operations management. On the right-hand side, you've got a blended learning environment where devices and users are outside the protection of the security and management, and consequently the attack surface is greater, the defenses are lower, and that is how those Trojan horses that are just stuck by each of the different characters can generally gain access into your systems and services. And it's not only the devices. If I'm working from home in London in a flat, and from my flat, if I scan, I can probably connect to 20 other wireless networks. If someone else's machine is compromised in the flat down the road, that attacker will gain access to all the other wireless networks that are localized, that are locally available, because the compromised machine can see them. And then if your wireless router at home isn't particularly well protected, as in default credentials on username and password, the attacker can hop over to different wireless access networks and then see whether there's any devices on those networks that are available to be compromised, and then consequently compromise those devices and then move into the organizational systems. So there are a whole variety of means that and ways in which, as a consequence of the move to people working from home, has lowered the defenses within not just education but every organization. And what data protection law calls for is for you to have an oversight of those different risks and then evaluate what you should be doing to minimize those risks. As I mentioned last week, the Academy Trust Handbook, or the week before, the Academy Trust Handbook was published. There's a blog on the 9 website that you will be able to read to understand the implications of this. But essentially, in the opening statement, the Baroness stated that many of you will be aware of the increasing number of cyber attacks involving ransomware, which are affecting the education sector and others. I know that these events can have devastating effects on organizations and individuals, and the department continues to work with crime prevention agencies to help trusts protect themselves. Then go on to say that trusts shouldn't be paying any ransoms when it comes to cybersecurity, and consequently, if you're not paying a ransom, the default is that you have to start all over again with all your you have to flatten your network, flatten all your devices, and essentially start over. Further within the Academy Trust Handbook, which is the new handbook that all Academy trusts are audited against. So it's not a voluntary requirement. It's a you must do these things. There are new obligations when it comes to understanding cybersecurity risks at a governance, audit, and risk level. And those are highlighted within 6.16 and obviously 6.17 of the Academy Trust Handbook. So if you've been struggling with your leadership to have them provide you with the resources or the support when it comes to cybersecurity, there is now a document that they have to follow and they have to evidence their compliance against at an audit level that supports you in asking for more resources and more support. Because at an audit level, the trust needs to be demonstrating that it is compliant with the Academy Trust Handbook, and that is supported by a document around internal scrutiny that also links back to risk and compliance. So this is from Annex 2 of the guidance on internal scrutiny within Academy trusts. And what they are saying here is there are 3 areas that need to be scrutinized. The last being cybersecurity, but the other ones being around data protection and the GDPR. So at a policy level, the government is not only making interventions when it's instructing schools that there is a threat, it's also instructing schools at an audit level in terms of how schools and trusts need to operate, that they have to be evidencing how they are identifying and managing their cybersecurity risks, but also preparing for a form of cybersecurity attack and having plans in place to manage an attack if there is a successful one. And as an organisation, that is where that is our expertise in terms of what we can support you with. So based upon our research, and as I said, we do cyber vulnerability and pen tests every single week, which supports schools and leadership in understanding their vulnerability to attack. We also have a service called Security and Systems, which is around supporting schools and IT teams with their capability and capacity in the area of cybersecurity. So upskilling at an operational level the teams in managing and managing their cyber footprint. So when it comes to reducing your footprint by 85%, so if you split this out, so 70% of your risk is associated with your users, and essentially your users being able, having the ability to compromise their own username and password essentially. But there are things that you can then do, very simple things like multi-factor authentication to like the fourth point there, that you can do to reduce that level of risk. And 30% of your cyber risk is around the IT operations. So we're focusing on how to reduce that balance of 30% by 85% essentially. Your people, employees and users that represent the 70%, how you reduce that is through training and supporting them to understand what the risks are. At 9, we've created a card game called Go Fish, and it's like cyber poker for educators that can be played at a leadership level to help leadership understand what the cyber risks are, what they should be aware of, and that can be played at a lower level as well. So when we look at the very simple and effective solutions for reducing your cyber risk, they're all entirely obvious, and they're all down to those individuals, which will guess many of you who are on the call today, about your just IT operations hygiene. These are keeping systems up to date, the principle of least privilege. I won't go through that. Strong password policies, two-factor authentication or multi-factor, effective management of user devices, and training end users. And the vulnerabilities that we see that lead to a successful attack are these: missing security patches, missing authentication on core systems, end-of-life systems, weak password policies, no two-factor, and then missing IT policies. When we look at the security patches and the missing authentication, we also quite often see an area of security misconfiguration. So if you have a good IT operations hygiene, as well as referred to earlier, you update your systems when security patches are released. You keep them all up to date when the other functional patches and updates are pushed. What we quite often see is there are schools that have, like, you can demonstrate effective IT operations, and they do all those things. But as more and more updates are applied, what we quite often see is there's a misconfiguration between how the systems were configured initially for security, and then how the continuous updates have sort of shifted and created a void where the systems are no longer configured to a secure level. Given every time there's been a function released, it's sort of like pushed something out of kilter. And then what hasn't happened is, after the IT team have then updated their systems, there hasn't been a procedure to go back and check to see whether the security configuration is as it should be. And when you look at your systems architecture between your firewall, your switches, your servers, cloud services, or internally within the school, from devices, wireless, network switches, core, servers. When you think of that context, you can start building up quite a significant amount of security misconfiguration. So although the school has confidence that all the patches are being applied, the actual weakness is actually in the misconfiguration between the different devices and services that go across the network and the servers, and consequently, it's that the cyber actor then it takes advantage of. Now, to reduce your vulnerability, you can reduce your vulnerability by 50%. Just having that effective update management and removal of end-of-life systems. In about 90% of cases, we find a Microsoft vulnerability called MS-1017, and it's a critical vulnerability. And in most schools, I would say we only pick up handful of devices, maybe maximum five devices, and primarily we find it on PCs or laptops, but occasionally we do find it on core servers or ancillary servers. So an access control server that may not be under the remit of IT, or CCTV server that may be under the remit of someone else. But quite often with that, when we find MS-1017, within about half an hour, we can gain full control over the domain, and if we were a cyber actor, we would be locking everyone out and putting a ransomware malware on the architecture. Yeah.
Sorry, on that point, then, can you just confirm that where you have that flaw on the network, that it can literally take half an hour to get access to the wider system?
Easily. Yeah. What you have, so what an attacker has, so if I explain to you what an attacker will do, so an attacker will come in, so let's say they compromise via the whole variety of different areas. So what they do is they have a toolkit, basically a Linux-based toolkit, and it automates a scan of identifying as many vulnerabilities as possible, because all the vulnerabilities to your IT systems, your switches, your wireless, your whatever it may be, devices, all those vulnerabilities are known about because they're published by the manufacturers on the internet. And what the manufacturers say is, we've got this security update against these vulnerabilities. Therefore, it's all published and known, and it's aggregated into databases. So they connect to that database, pull it down, and they have a real-time understanding of every vulnerability across every device, system, and service globally. Then look at your system's architecture and go, okay, where are the vulnerabilities? Oh, there's a vulnerability with this network switch. Or they also have a tool that will scan the network and will automatically try to brute force every device that you have, every network switch, wireless access point, UPS, server, network cards, and it'll try to brute force it by, first of all, putting in the default credentials associated with each of those individual components. So there are databases out there that tell you the default credentials for an APC, UPS, power sheet, whatever. Those default credentials are known. Your network switches, every type of network switch is default credentials are known on the internet. And so if you don't change your default credentials, then on everything, then if someone comes in, they scan, automatically they get access to that device. Now, if that device is then a network switch, and network switch can get access to the core, then you do exactly the same thing. Or at that point, what you can start doing is you can start using DHCP or TXT to gain control of the core switch or the systems and services off the back of it. Or you can scan to see that the lights out management card in your HP service has never had its firmware updated. So consequently, you go in the back door through the lights out management card, and then consequently you're at a firmware level within the server, and then you're sort of reversing yourself back into the Microsoft environment. So yeah, within the average time it takes us to get domain access is 4 hours. Probably less so, and that was about last year. Less so now. So it's very easy to do that, Oliver.
Wow. So the main access, as Mark refers to, would mean sort of full admin access to your network. It's not a good thing to have that within 4 hours. Thanks, Mark. Okay, yeah, you carry on.
Cheers. So update management and end of life systems. And you need to have a routine. So when we work with schools on our security and systems service, we go through a process of hardening, and part of the hardening is around operations management. And a good process to have is on Monday morning, every Monday, it is someone's job to go through the reviewing what needs to be updated, and then either doing immediately any security issue, any security priorities, and then the things that aren't an immediate critical priority, put them in a list, and then you do all of the outstanding ones every 6 weeks. And if there is an issue, there is a procedure to notify the leadership of the school to go, actually, we have this critical issue on these servers. We can manage the risks the rest of the day, but by the end of the day, we need to turn them all off and update them. But it's having that process, that procedure, that responsibility, and someone accountable to be doing that allows you to reduce that risk by 50%, and that costs you nothing to do so. 25% of vulnerabilities is around security misconfiguration. So, and essentially that's what I touched upon earlier. The more patches you update, the sort of greater outer kilter your systems are when it comes to security. But if you're putting in place a procedure around managing your updates, not only around making sure that everything's updated, then going back and checking that the configuration is as it should be, you can reduce your risk by 25%. But that assumes that you have documentation that details how your systems should be configured. Because if you haven't got that documentation, what are you benchmarking against? And many schools that we go into just haven't had the capacity or the time to actually create detailed systems documentation that would allow you to benchmark what the configuration should be. Therefore, it's anyone's best guess about what it should be, and that isn't documented. But by doing the documentation, you can reduce your risk by 25%. By continuing without documentation and understanding what the benchmark of your security configuration should be, then you're carrying that residual risk of 25%.
Just
and last,
quickly, Mark.
Sorry, yep.
Oh, sorry, we've got a question from Anwar, who's just sort of said, obviously on your comments about having a regular routine of checking. I suppose within the context of education, where time is limited and everyone has so many hats that they wear and there's so much work to do, from your experience, how likely is it that people are doing these checks? I mean, is there any advice on how to sort of implement that within a real world scenario?
Well, it comes back to the school or the trust having to prioritize their resources, and in many cases, 90% of schools that doesn't happen, and that's generally because of resources and time. We have a service called Cyber Vulnerability Essentials where we will do a detailed analysis. The minimum is every 6 months or every 3 months, which then does the hard work for the IT team, and then gives them a schedule of things that they actually have to do to remedy the vulnerabilities that have been identified. But again, that costs money to do. And even doing the times, although I said it doesn't cost money, if you're going to do all the assessment and you're scanning yourself, there is still a cost there to understand, to buy a license of a piece of software that's going to help you do that. That could be £4,000 a year just for that software. But then you have to have the expertise around the interrogation of everything that's been identified. So unfortunately, it's a resources-based issue, and you can see what the Department for Education are trying to do, and the ESFA, is they are trying to raise that up the priority order for those responsible for leadership and allocating the resources within trusts and academies. If you're not in a trust and academy, the Academy Financial Handbook doesn't apply to you. But they are doing their best to raise it up the agenda, and it's those individuals who are responsible for allocating the resources to make the decision based upon the risks, the risks within their score. I think someone's just said that. Can they make a comment? Oliver, say, do you just want to pick that one up as well?
Yes, Cameron, do you want to just type it and I'll relay it on? That might be the quickest one, and perhaps we'll revisit that.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, you carry on, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, fine. So, lastly, 10% is around weak authentication methods, and this can be authentication between not only on devices but in services, service accounts. Even if you have you think you have a great username and password on service accounts, there is technology that, so long as you can access and you can see the authentication method or location, that then you can compromise it through a toolkit. Now, what we have seen, and there's a sort of pattern, what you see within when an attacker gets into a system, they will go as far as their skills allow. So, and they will quite often buy a ransomware toolkit. It's called ransomware as a service. They'll buy a toolkit for like $500 that gives them all the tools to do all these things I'm talking about, and a lot of that's automated and intelligent. The whole idea being that if I've paid $500 and I got this toolkit, I then get a ransom because I'm using the malware that I've been given for my toolkit to encrypt data or services. When that ransom is paid, a percentage of the ransom goes to the people who I bought the toolkit from for $500, and I keep a bit now, or I keep most of it. Now, if I get into like one of your score systems, but I get to a point where I can't move any further because I just don't have the skills, I just sort of raise a flag, and someone who's got more experience as a cyber attacker will then come in, take over from me, and then should that person then be successful in doing the same, in getting to the domain admin or being able to encrypt data or services, and they deploy the ransomware, and then the ransom is paid, they then get a piece, I get a piece, and the people that gave me the toolkit get a piece as well. So there's a whole economy around around cybersecurity, and it's not just someone within their bedroom trying to attack systems. It's very, very well organized in terms of ransomware as a service, and it's getting more complex. There's a blog on the Nine website around a malware that is a Trojan. And is undetectable once it's the chatty one. That once it's got going, and regardless to how secure your firewall is, unless you have specific services turned off or specific secure configuration, they can communicate with their malware remotely. They don't need to have a direct VPN in or anything else. There's a new coding language that is being deployed. I will say, whilst we'll probably do some more webinars with Joskos on this, we do have like a 6-weekly cyber webinar called Education Cyber. You can watch all the previous ones on the Nine YouTube channel. But also just go onto our website and subscribe to anything or ask about anything, and you'll be added to a mailing list for the next ones. So when it comes to data protection law within the UK and with internationally, so we work with schools globally, and every country is now changing its data protection law to reflect that of the GDPR in Europe, which is essentially a risk-based approach. I mentioned 2 articles earlier, Article 25 and Article 32. 25, data protection by design and by default. So whenever you're doing any new IT system or service or project, any upgrades that you're doing, you need to determine what the risks are associated with that and manage those risks. You can use our tech platform, the Nine app, to do that assessment and manage your risks. and that should be done in conjunction with your data protection officer within your school, which you all should have. The second one is security of processing, which is you having the ability, and you're required to benchmark all your cybersecurity and IT risks, and then have in place a process to mitigate those risks over a period of time, and how quickly you mitigate them is proportionate to the resources available to you. So if you're, if you are a large school, you would, generally speaking, and the rule of thumb, have more money available within a budget to help you mitigate those risks. And it's the leadership of the organisation that is responsible for determining the level of resources that should be applied to manage these risks. But in order for them to do so, they first of all need to understand what risks they are facing, and have those presented to them in an objective in an objective format. So and that's what we do. So we do our vulnerability assessment, as you can see here, is a quantified risk assessment of the issues, MS 1017 you'll see here, the host where that it affects, the severity based upon the impact and likelihood, and the required mitigating actions for the IT team to do. In a typical school, we would see 30 to 40 of these individual issues, and the whole idea is that when we do one of these assessments, the first time we do it is 30 or 40, but then the next time we do it and it's like 20, and the next time we do it is 15, and the school can evidence how it's taking cybersecurity seriously. There's always going to be a risk. There's always going to be vulnerabilities that are residual, that you don't have the time, you don't have the money to resolve, but you do have the time and the money and the legal responsibility to mitigate your critical and high ones. And this is an example of a school that we did an assessment for within September and within February. And I've got here like data and FD should be provided, or a business manager, because this is the data that they need to evidence their compliance with data protection law within the UK, but also to evidence their compliance with the Academy Trust Handbook around cybersecurity. So in September, this school had a total of 24 issues. 6 were critical, and that was across 77 devices. I won't dwell upon this because it's sort of self-explanatory, but they had this report, worked through all the different issues. We did it again in February. They still have 3 criticals, but only across 5 devices. So there's a significant reduction in risk. Whilst the vulnerabilities were critical, the number of devices that it affected were relatively low, and actually then there were plans in place to mitigate that, and consequently the same figures are across each of the individual other areas. And then we look at the areas of concern. So those areas of concern that I identified earlier, you've got more powerful figures here. So weak authentication, patch management, secure configuration, end of life services. So weak authentication 66 to 3, patch 51 to 4, and secure configuration 116 down to 27. So these are all instances that any attacker could compromise to attacking the sort of domain admin. But the score here can demonstrate that it's taking a proportionate response to managing the systems and services. And the IT team can then also evidence how much time it's taking them to do, which then allows the overall organisation to make a judgment about the additional resources that may be required. I identified there that's one of the services is around the cyber vulnerability. That's just the ongoing checking and helping you understand what you need to get done and giving you a plan of what you need to get done. We have a more comprehensive service that seems to be very popular with multi-academy trusts, which is called Security and Systems, which is a modular program to build capability and capacity within your school or within your trust that does all the things that you need to do based legally within the GDPR when it comes to information and cybersecurity, but also within the Academy Trust Trust Handbook. I won't go through each of those different modules, but if you are interested in having a conversation with us, and do reach out to your Joskos representative or you can look at the Nine website, has more information on it. The security and systems assessment that we do also provides you a comprehensive assessment across the entire configurations of your systems architecture, allows you to align yourself against the NCSE 10 steps to cybersecurity, and gives you an indication as to whether you would get the Cyber Essentials certification within the UK, which is a certification to say that you do things generally properly. And obviously within this score here, they're only 60% on Cyber Essentials, and then we, as part of the program, we help them get Cyber Essentials certified. But again, from a management perspective, you can see exactly where you sit across infrastructure, connectivity, services, operations, end user devices, etc. It's a whole range of different things there. I won't dwell on it. So support from Nine. We have cyber incident response and management within the Nine app. So the Nine app allows you to evaluate your if you have an incident, it's the severity of the incident, how it affects people, whether you have to report it to the ICO. Allows you to evaluate how you are the projects that you are developing, going to do over the summer, or any upgrades that you have, the security risks associated with that. And importantly, also allows you to evaluate the vendors that you use, not only about their cyber compliance, their data protection compliance, but also any safeguarding risks that the technology that you use within your school could create, and that need to be managed by your safeguarding team. There is a 14-day trial that you can have with that, free of charge. We do these are a variety of. I won't touch upon all of them. The AA of cyber incident response. If you do have an incident, then we have a response team that can support you in dealing with the issues, and then we do a variety of other things around Office 365 and Google security assessments, amongst other things. But as I said, anything that you need more information of, then speak to Joskos, or you can always get in touch. My details are here. Lastly, I sort of touch upon the resources that are there to support you. There's an open source security logging platform from the NCSE called Logging Made Easy. It's primarily about Windows devices, so it only tell you about the stuff that's Microsoft or runs on Microsoft within your architecture. It won't necessarily tell you about everything else, network switches, wireless access points, etc., etc. It does need a degree of technical competence, quite a significant amount of technical competence to you have to download it from GitHub, and then you have to run it on a Linux box, etc., etc. But you can use it. The other one is the NCSE Early Warning Service. There's a board toolkit that you can give to your board, because in the board toolkit it refers to the board of governors and what their obligations are. And also there's an NCSE supply governance framework that you should be referring to when you're bringing on any suppliers on board. All the links to those will be in the references section at the end of this. There we go, references section at the end of the slide deck. That will be sent to you after this webinar. So with that, that's everything I've got. So over to questions, if there's any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, certainly some interesting comments. So Cameron, who I mentioned earlier, sort of had some comments, has posted in the chat sort of a list of some of the things that they've been looking at. But certainly makes a very valid point, I think, in there, which is that backups, our old friend backups, are a very important thing to constantly remember. So off-site backups, whereby you can obviously restore data from if you do have some issue. As ever, though, you might have some comments on this, Mark, but my feeling is that with backups, you also need to factor those into any cybersecurity analysis, insofar as the assumption is that you get hit by a cybersecurity attack and then all hell breaks loose, effectively, and then you want to restore from backups. But obviously, quite often, what's happening is that cybersecurity flaw has existed for some time, and the presence of any malware or ransomware may have been in your system for some time. And you need to have an awareness of that, so that when you're restoring from backups, you're not just relying on backups. You need to kind of understand what backup you need to restore from.
Yeah, you're completely quite right. What you often find is, even if you have, you have your backup, then you may have a second backup, an offsite backup, or use Red Store or something. All those systems, all those different services can also be compromised via a malware. What we suggest you do is you do your daily backups, then you have secondary backup, but also then you have an offline backup that you do every week. And with the offline backup, you then, so if you do get hit with a ransomware and you wipe everything and everything's gone apart from the offline backup, then the maximum you're going to lose is 7 days worth of work. And the other thing I will say to that is, you can have as many backups as essentially you like, but if you haven't tested the restoration of those backups, then you're at risk of not being able to restore those systems and services. So as part of the what we encourage schools to do as part of our security and systems, you go through the process of making sure you have the policies and procedures associated with your backup, but also once a year you test your disaster recovery plan in terms of being able to restore from backups and taking through those lessons learned. That quite often, more often than not, is typically has to be completed during half term or over a weekend. So it needs to have organizational buy-in, because there are obviously additional potential costs associated with that. But it's something that the Department for Education, the ESFA, the ICO in the UK are all saying that you should have a disaster recovery and business continuity plan that is tested.
Okay. And also, you mentioned sort of early on in the presentation at the start, a list of sort of, if you like, easy wins, things that you can look at to kind of lower your footprint, your security threat, your risk. Two-factor authentication was on there. Now, two-factor authentication, just to confirm, that's the kind of stuff that we're using with banking apps. And when you log into your PayPal account and Amazon, if you set it up on Amazon, you get a text, you get something else, as well as your password, just meaning that if a password is guessed or found out, that a password in itself isn't enough to get you onto the system. You need to have something else. That's the two-factor, the other factor.
Yep.
That's right, isn't it? It's not anything fancy. It's just the same stuff that we're familiar with.
Yeah, exactly. And you can get the authenticator. Google have an authenticator app for different services. It's either text messages, a range of different things. What you generally find is a reticence of users to want to do it, and you get pushback. But that is if you don't have two-factor or multi-factor authentication, across, first of all, your IT systems and services level, and all the staff that have high levels of privileges to data into systems, then you're off to a hiding, and then around the rest of your staff, but before you get to you don't necessarily need to worry about the students, but the rest of your staff, then you have the range. There needs to be a process and then get an engagement through at a policy level to say that this is what we are doing, and we are seeing more and more trusts just making the decision to do that. I do see there's some good feedback here from Cameron, and we go to a lot of schools. We don't see the things that you've got there about the ACLs and port level authentication and whatnot. But it's that basic level of hardening that's going to protect you. So if you're looking at your network architecture and you've just got a handful of VLANs, but you haven't gone down to ACLs or port level authentication, then you're very much at risk of someone laterally moving across your architecture to gain control of your systems and services. You should be looking at the configuration that you currently have in place, or what you can do with your network, and put everything in that you possibly can. Because it's those very basic things that are the things that will stop someone laterally moving within your architecture.
I think hardening is a good word to use, isn't it? Because it's about taking kind of the basic common sense approaches, but making them that bit better. So extending things to sort of ports and locking down who can access specific ports on things, as well as just the things that we can physically see.
Yeah, and it does take time. Doing a project around around both of those things. It's not something you can do in 24 hours. Typically, it takes time to plan. It takes time to do. So,
you also mentioned at the start then about pen testing. So that's one of your services. Can you just go into detail for those, unlike me, who sort of oddly reads this stuff, but what's involved in a pen test?
A pen test, okay, it's quite simple. The things that I've explained. So a pen test is around someone, such as Nine, identifying the vulnerabilities within your systems, like the ones we had. Let me just go back to this one here. I know we're running over, but there's a vulnerability here to MS 1017, unsupported Windows OS and OS remote. So cybersecurity attacker, and what you do on a pen test is exactly the same. You go, okay, there's a vulnerability. Now I'm going to attack it, and I'm going to try to penetrate through that vulnerability and gain a high level of access. So when we talk about penetration testing is just an outcome or an output of a vulnerability assessment to demonstrate that vulnerability can be compromised. And a penetration test is you can do for 1 day, 3 days, 5 days. The more that you try to hack something, the more access that you're going to eventually get. So when we talk about okay, we do a cyber vulnerability assessment and pen test. The pen test is validating that we can gain a level of access and the impact and likelihood of that specific risk, supported by, like here, we have identified the evidence of us compromising that vulnerability. In this link here, obviously you can't click on it because it's a screenshot, but it's the penetration bit is just compromising the vulnerability. You can see the vulnerability. You can see the vulnerability. You can see the vulnerabilities. The penetration testing piece is compromising that to gain a level of access that would give rise to a successful attack. Does that make sense?
So, yep. So this is like, I hate to say this perhaps, but this is like the good guy version of perhaps what the hacker is trying to do, but without the risk, if you like. There's no actual damage being caused. There's nothing being changed. It's probing, but doing it in the same way that a hacker might, but for the purpose of reporting on it so you can fix it.
Yeah, and there are 3 types of pen tests. So cyber vulnerability, right? You've got internal. This one's internal. You've got externals, but looking at your firewall and your external services, and then you've got web app. And web app is around you use Firefly, Frog, whatever that may be. Now, or you have your own bespoke platform that you've built. In the UK, we don't typically find that many schools build their own learning environment that's connected to their website, and therefore we don't necessarily do many web app tests. The external pen test is about, okay, well, can I hack through your firewall? Well, probably unlikely you can, but we don't do hacking of firewalls. We check to see the services that you have that are facing the internet and seeing there's any vulnerabilities there, such as RDP. And then the biggest focus is around the internal vulnerability in pen tests, because if someone gets hold of your device or compromises the device, they're internal to your network anyway. They're not trying to get in from the outside, so they're already there. We come across quite a few people that say, well, I'm fine, I've had an external pen test by XXX, it cost £500. Okay, but yeah, they just looked at your firewall and realized that you can't actually get through a firewall and you've got no external services, when actually your risk is internal to your system's architecture, not necessarily coming in through the firewall.
Okay, thanks. One final point. I'm aware of time, and I'm aware that obviously many of you might have other meetings to go to, but one more very good comment from Neri, staff training and the importance of that. Neri's mentioned that they send out, which is very common now, fake phishing emails to their staff, and then they wait for staff members to interact with those fake phishing emails, and then you can then report on how many staff members clicked on the link, how many then went on to type in their username and password, and raise that in staff meetings, SLT meetings, governors, trustee meetings, and staff buy-in, staff education, staff awareness, that's really, one of those easy wins, isn't it? Something you should really start discussing with staff and educating them on.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Like we've got I'll just show you this. So we've got our games-based learning. I think the phishing attacks are simulated phishing is great. There are some data protection issues there when you're reporting back, the success or failure of it. You don't want to be reporting people's names. You want to say, well, we had this percentage of staff, maybe at this type of levels, because the disclosure of that type of data can give rise to some form of discrimination. So you need to have a policy around that. Within if I go to incident management, we have a whole range of different training that videos that you have access to through our technology, that you would have your head of HR, your business manager, or your senior members of staff would have access to the training through our platform. On our website and on our YouTube channel, there's also a whole variety of different free training materials on cybersecurity that you can do. But the most important thing is having a program of work around or program of activity over the course of the year when it comes to training. If you go to the website, also we've got you can download cyber posters designed specifically for education. If you have a cybersecurity breach and it's investigated by the ICO in the UK, first of all, it's unlikely that you're going to be fined, because many people say that you're going to be fined because it's a data protection breach. It's unlikely. But the organisations that do get greater scrutiny are those that haven't done any training when it comes to data protection or cybersecurity, because it's those organisations that are then deemed what's termed willfully negligent of their duties. So the ICO and within the GDPR, there's this term willfully negligent, where you haven't evaluated what your risks are, and it's those organisations that when they have a security incident and they are investigated, if they're deemed negligent, they're the ones who will get action. In Europe, there's been a lot more schools that have been fined than no one in the UK has been fined.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Well, it sounds certainly that even sort of taking the next step and reporting on this and understanding the risks that you face in itself can be quite useful. Right, I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you, Mark. It's been incredibly useful. We've had some great comments. For those of you that want to know more, then please reach out to us here at Joskos through the usual channels, or myself, Oliver Marshall. Certainly also those of you that want to reach out to Mark at 9, his contact details will also be in all the links provided. And do look out for the next set of Eventbrite links, because we'll be running a series of webinars on various topics throughout the rest of the year. Once again, thank you very much. I hope your day goes well, and I hope you enjoyed the football this evening. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Bye.